In this section, we will focus on the concept of trajectory similarity. But why is this important? It is important because determining the similarity of trajectories is a fundamental problem which is shared by many different analysis tasks. For example, in pattern recognition, we want to discover recurring movement behaviors. For example, daily commuting routes or migration paths of animals. In anomaly detection, we want to identify movements that do not follow those usual patterns. For example, suspicious behavior or unusual ship routes in marine traffic. In prediction of movements, we want to use past trajectories to forecast the next steps of a moving object. For example, we want to predict the traffic flow or, for example, where a storm might move next. And last but not least, but this is a somehow different field, in network extraction, we can reconstruct road networks or pathways just by analyzing many trajectories of vehicles or pedestrians at those places. To make this a bit more concrete, consider this given example of a road junction and suppose that we have not only those few trajectories, but we have maybe collected hundreds or more trajectories at this location. Here our goal is to detect the turning possibilities, for example left turn, right turn, or straight ahead and so on. However, this is not trivial because first we have to group similar trajectories together, and second we need to decide which groups present valid turning options and which of those are just noise or rare outliers. So our steps to tackle this problem are: first, we need to determine the turning possibilities. So in this case, we need to group similar trajectories together. And second, we need to distinguish between valid and non-valid turning possibilities. So we have to decide which groups, so which clusters represent valid turning options and which of those are just outliers. Hereby, we will just follow those assumptions. We say if many vehicles follow the same path, their trajectories will be similar, and we can cluster them as one valid option. A valid turning possibility is usually frequently used, so if only one or two cars take a strange path, it might not be considered as a valid option. When we say that trajectories of vehicles using the same turning options are somehow similar, the next question is, of course, how do we actually define similarity? In general, two objects are considered similar if their features have similar values. And two values are similar if the distance between them, measured according to some metric, is small. Let's take a simple example with some geometric shapes and objects, which is down here on the left side. Here we see some points, shapes, and colors. Whether two objects are considered similar here depends on the features we evaluate and the metric we use. If we, for example, use Euclidean distance as metric and we just evaluate the location of those objects here, we will find out that, for example, those two objects which are close to each other are quite similar regarding the location, as well as those objects here, and this might be an outlier in this case. However, if we just evaluate the y component of the coordinates, we will get a totally different result. Yeah? In this case, we would just evaluate the y, which means we would put together maybe, it's not that easy here, but maybe we have here the natural break as well as here. So we would just evaluate those. If we just evaluate the shape of the objects, yet we will get another result. In this case, we would group all those objects together with similar or same shapes in this case. Yeah, we would just put together the squares like this one and this one in one. We would put together all the hexagons like this one and this one, and all the circles would be in one cluster in the end. Now, if we just consider the angles, the number of the angles of the objects, we would yet get another result. Same for the color. Hereby, we just would evaluate the colors of the objects. The important point here is that the similarity always depends on the evaluated features in the distance matrix. And this entirely depends on which features we choose to compare and which distance metric we use. And we can transfer this as well to the trajectories. For example, we can check and compare the shapes, or we just measure the length, or the positions in space, or the timings. In our example, we could try to simplify the problem by not comparing entire trajectories, but only comparing the points of those trajectories. This means if we just take all the points individually and compute their Euclidean distances, then the points that are close together in space will be considered as similar. At the first glance, this might look quite promising. For example, in this picture, we can already see the different clusters by the different colors here. You see one cluster here with the yellow points, one with the blue one here, the green, and so on. However, the major problem with this approach is that if we just reduce the trajectories to a collection of points, we lose the structure of the movement. So in this case, we cannot tell anymore whether two points belong to the same trajectory or whether they come from complete different ones. In other words, we only capture local similarity between individual points, but not the global similarity between entire trajectories. So the solution is not sufficient for our goal to detect turning possibilities or to compare trajectories as complete movement paths. We need methods that respect and preserve the sequential structure of those trajectories. Now that we've seen the limitations by simply comparing this individual points of the trajectories, let's have a look at different methods that allow us to compare whole trajectories. There are a lot of different distance metrics available, and here it's just a small list of those. So we have here the Euclidean distance, the Hausdorff distance, dynamic time warping, Fréchet metric, longest common subsequences, LP distance, and so on. In the following, we want to have a closer look at, for example, the Euclidean distance, the Hausdorff distance, the dynamic time warping, as well as the Fréchet metric.